This conference will now be recorded.
So central nervous system consists of central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. So as you know, brain and spinal cord, central nervous system, and peripheral nerves, cranial nerves, and then spinal nerves. So this is the structure, you know, in our anatomy, you might have read all these things, all the loops and then cortex, everything, centers for the taste, speech, reading, and like that, and associated areas. So these are the peripheral nervous system, 12 pairs of cranial nerves. And then next is it originates from the brain and controls the activities of the brain and takes the impulses to and from the brain. So this is the emergence of all the cranial nerves, various cranial nerves. And regarding the spinal nerves, there are 31 pairs of spinal nerves, 8 pairs, that is the cervical, C8 up to that, 12 pairs thoracic nerves, and 5 pairs lumbar, and 5 pairs of sacral nerves, and 1 pair of coccygeal nerve. So these are very important to localize where exactly is the lesion. So if you know the segment value only, you can be able to make out the site of lesion. Yes. So the dermatomal distribution, this is also very important when you are testing the sensations, touch, pain, temperature, whatever. So the segmental corresponding segments, dermatomes, you have to examine and say which is at fault, you can make out. That is the sensory root of the single spinal nerve. So now we'll go to the examination proper. So in the examination of nervous system, the first important thing is history elicitation. So history, if the patient is not able to tell, so patient is aphasic or is unconscious, then we should take the history from the attendant. In the exam also, you should write the history is taken from the recorded from the attendant. You have to mention it and then write the case sheet. Because history is very important, because the lesions, whatever clinical manifestations occur, they cannot give you a clue how it has happened, what exactly is the cause. Suppose if the patient has got a chronic neurological deficit, so then if the patient is a long history is there, that means you can think of a degenerative disease like that. Suppose if it is sudden onset, the causes are entirely different, but the manifestations, clinical manifestations and examination findings are almost same. So that's why history is very, very important. 90% of the diagnosis is made in the central nervous system is made by the history only. So first one, so usually we'll think of this CVA, that is the commonest thing, the paraplegia and other things, so you don't need those things. So usually the either acute CVA, this is a common thing you will get in your examination. The paraplegia and other things in the quadriplegia, whatever it may be, it is for the postgraduates. So as far as the neurological deficit is concerned, the mode of onset is very, very important. That's so. So suppose if it is a sudden onset occurring within minutes or hours, so you have to think of the acute etiological, like either a trauma or a hemorrhage, like that. You have to think of it. If it is a sudden, if it onset is sudden but gradually progressive and patient is improving, that means once again you have to think of a vascular etiology. Like that, the mode of onset is that suddenly occurred or not, or it's a gradually progressive. So usually degenerative or a nutrition or any other thing. So that can be slow onset and tumor. So gradually progressive. So the mode of onset is very, very important to know the etiology of the neurological deficit. Then time of onset. So time of onset is usually in case of CVA, cerebrovascular accident. So usually time when the patient is early morning, stroke occurs, the patient develops weakness of the one side of the limb, one upper limb and lower limb. In the, when he wakes up in the early morning, so that means it is usually it is a thrombotic etiology, because during the night time or when the patient is sleeping, so it is gradual onset. So because the thrombosis occurs where the circulation is slow, thrombotic attacks are more common. On the other hand, if the patient is working and then in the daytime or whatever it may be, patient is working or is physically or emotionally upset, At that time, if the patient complains of a neurological deficit, complaining of severe headache, vomitings, and then neurological deficit, we have to think of a hemorrhagic period. Whereas like a golden blue moon, so that is suddenly without his knowledge, if a patient develops a without any symptoms, so that may be usually embolic phenomena you have to think of. That's why time of onset is very, very important. Is it has it occurred in the patient while he is working, or is the patient sleeping and after waking up from the bed? If he develops, that may be most probably a thrombotic etiology you have to think of. Next is the progress of symptoms. So usually in case of a vascular etiology, so the lesion may progress, patient may have deficit, neurological deficit, and in case of hemorrhage, so my symptoms can be there. If it is a severe hemorrhage, so it will progress. So patient will develop a neurological symptoms will be worsened, and he may die within 48 to 72 hours. Whereas if the hemorrhage is minimal, so he may improve in course of time. Similarly, a thrombosis also, patient develops a neurological deficit and gradually he may improve. So that is suggestive of a thrombotic etiology. So whereas in case of a neurological disease due to either a degenerative or due to tumor, unless the cause is treated, the patient will have progressive symptoms. So that is the importance of the progressive symptoms. Next, symptoms suggestive of raised intracranial tension, you should ask whenever a patient comes with a CVA. So the common symptoms they can have are the headache, and then diffuse headache, they can have projectile vomiting. That means the patient will not have any nausea. So he will have vomiting. That is what is called as the projectile vomiting. That indicates a neurological this one. So raised intracranial tension, patient will have headache, projectile vomiting, and visual disturbances. Usually they do visual disturbances. They can have blurring of vision. They can have and loss of consciousness. This is a very important thing. Loss of consciousness indicates patient is having a cerebral edema. So which is the cause for the loss of consciousness. So these people require sudden so emergency treatment required is for this type of cases where the patient has got a raised intracranial tension symptoms. And then seizures. Seizures are also important whenever there is a cerebral edema is there. So they can come with a generalized seizure. So these are all the symptoms which suggest the patient should be treated urgently. Otherwise, his neurological status will worsen. And then next, loss of speech. So loss of speech means you are a difficulty in speech. So aphasia or a dysphasia, you call it in medical terminology. So that indicates patient is having lesion in the speech center. So this is the loss of speech when the patient has got a right-sided hemiplegia. So left side, so the area where the speech center is affected. So patient can have aphasia or dysphasia depending upon the amount of involvement. Patient can have these symptoms. And pertaining to the symptoms of pyramidal tract, so if you have to trace out when a patient comes with a weakness, is it due to pyramidal tract or is it due to extrapyramidal or is it due to a peripheral nerve or a cerebellar? There are so many tracts are there. So each has got a specific way of presenting. So usually when the pyramidal tract, that means in corticospinal tract, when it is affected or upper motor neuron type of lesion, usually weakness of the muscles will be there and stiffness. Patient complains of stiffness of the muscles. So these are the two symptoms suggestive of a pyramidal tract. And then extrapyramidal symptom, also there will be symptom stiffness of the muscles will be there, and then it may be associated with involuntary movements can be there. So as you see in a Parkinson's disease, they can have pill rolling movement like that, or sometimes they can have chorea, so depending upon the involvement of the basal ganglia and other things. They can have associated involuntary movements can be there. So usually they will have stiffness of muscles. In Parkinson's, we can see the stiffness of the limbs can be there. So that is suggestive of extrapyramidal. That is the basal ganglia involvement. If there is a stiffness is there and weakness associated, usually that is a pyramidal tract or corticospinal tract involvement. And the peripheral nerve also, the patient can have weakness, but usually it is associated with the sensory symptoms like tingling and numbness. So if the patient has got a weakness as well as tingling and numbness, so more suggestive of a peripheral nerve. So from the history itself, we can make out whether it is a pyramidal tract or extrapyramidal is involved, or is it a peripheral nerve. And sometimes in a cerebellar disease also they can have the weakness, but usually they will have associated symptoms like slurred speech or a drunken speech they can have, and instability in the gait they can have. They will be swaying to one side or other, they can be there, and then they can have incoordination of the muscles. So if the patient complains, I'm not able to walk properly, I'm falling into one side or other, and the speech abnormality is there. So that means that is the involvement of the cerebellar system. Like that. Other symptoms are also there. Mainly these symptoms suggest the cerebellar involvement is there. And the dorsal columns. So usually the dorsal columns are involved in case of syphilis or in case of nutritional, like subacute combined degeneration is there, or in tumors. So where the dorsal columns are affected or posterior columns are affected, usually instability in the gait, they can have ataxia, they can have. So usually in case of cerebellar ataxia, the patient will be vision will be normal. When even with the vision normal, day or night time, he will complain of instability of the gait and inquality. Whereas in dorsal column ataxias, usually when the visual reflexes are not there, that means in the night time, dark night, or when the patient has got defective vision is there, so then the patient night times patient will have, or when the eyes are closed, they will have ataxia, and it will be increased when the eyes are closed. So that is what is called a wash basin attacks are there, or Romberg's test. If you do it, you can confirm it. So ataxia, so instability in the gait, and then this thing usually worsening during night time, or when the vision is not proper, or when the eyes are closed. That means it is suggestive of a dorsal column. And another important symptom of dorsal column is funicular. That means a tight bandage, and as if a tight bandage applied to the limbs. That is the tip around the limbs, a tight bandage is applied. So like that, the sensation will be there. So that is typical of a dorsal column involvement. So dorsal column involvement, when the patient has got, you have to think of first infection, syphilis, or a nutritional disorder, either B12 or like that, or it can be due to the tumors also. Sometimes they can have these symptoms. Now the signs of meningeal irritation. So meningeal irritation, usually meninges, if it is due to infective etiology, the patient can have fever, headache, vomitings can be there, and associated with neck pain, stiffness of the neck, and photophobia will be there. So this is common with the infective, either a tuberculosis meningitis or a pyogenic or a viral meningitis. These are the symptoms which are common in the infective etiology. But suppose if it is due to the subarachnoid hemorrhage, so patient comes with a CVA, and if you find stiffness of the neck, that indicates that is a subarachnoid hemorrhage. So in CVA, you have to think of subarachnoid hemorrhage. If it is infective etiology, you have to rule out either viral or bacterial infections. You have to rule out. So these are the symptoms. Photophobia. This is the important symptom of pyogenic meningitis or viral or the tuberculosis common. And next important thing, bowel and bladder disturbance. This can occur when there is a bilateral cortical disease, or when the patient has got a major involvement of the cerebral edema is there, or hemispheres are infected, or when there is a pathology at the spinal cord level where the sympathetic or a parasympathetic are affected. So then they can have bowel or bladder involvement or autonomic disturbance we can think of. So usually the bowel disturbance, they can have retention, or they may have incontinence of the bowel, they can complain. A bladder also, they can have the incontinence of the urine. So when the patient comes with a cerebrovascular accident, so the higher centers are affected, there may be incontinence of the urine can be there. Or there may be sometimes a retention of the urine, or this depends upon the sympathetic or a parasympathetic involvement. A spastic bladder can be there, or incontinence can be there, urgency or precipitancy. These are the various bladder symptoms they can have depending upon the segments, usually L4 to L lumbar or sacral involvement. The patient can have these bladder disturbances, or when the higher centers are affected, or in case of degenerative diseases like dementia and other cases also, patient can have bowel and bladder disturbances can be there. And another important thing, head injury. So this is very important. Sometimes patient may forget about his head injury. So a few months before he might have had a head injury, he might have forgotten it, and externally there may not be any injury. And if he comes with a neurological deficit, you have to exclude whether the neurological symptoms are related to head injury or not. So it can be confirmed by the neurological examination and investigations like CT or MRI. You can confirm the diagnosis of head injury. So next is the history of taking drugs. So usually psychotropic drugs can produce, or in metabolic like alcoholism, that is also another thing, or any anxiety, antidepressant. There are so many drugs which can produce, or a patient may develop a bleeding manifestations. So because of the anticoagulants or antiplatelets or aspirin. So these may produce antiplatelets like aspirin. So they may produce hemorrhagic and patient may have a neurological deficit. And otherwise, so if the patient, especially in a female, if the patient is taking OC pills, so you have to think of a thrombotic etiology. So that is the importance of the taking drugs important. Now history due to, so this is in general, and then history symptoms due to cranial nerve. You can elicit from the history itself, you can make out which cranial nerve is affected. So if there are 12 pairs are there olfactory, so usually the patient may complain of loss of sense of smell or altered smell. That is what is called parosmia. Parosmia means altered sense of smell. So nowadays, because of COVID infection, so the earliest symptom may be loss of sensation or altered smell may be there. So now this is the most important symptom you have to remember in a COVID season. So other things are, it can be due to transient, it can be due to a upper respiratory catarrh, nasal catarrh. They can have a transient loss of sense of smell can be there. If permanent, if it is present persisting more than 1 month, then naturally you have to think of any tumor etiology, you have to think of any local pathology or a tumor you have to think of. So the symptom loss of sense of smell or parosmia. So this can occur, parosmia can occur in case of psychiatric disorders they can have, or cachosmia, that means persistent altered sense of smell, then bad smell, that indicates atrophic sinus. So this can be there in case of atrophic, this one, the patient can have persistent bad smell because of the degeneration or the destruction of the bones, they can have this one, atrophic rhinitis. Next is the optic nerve symptom. So you should ask rapidly the patient is having any symptoms regarding the cranial nerve movement involvement, you can ask. The visual field defects, the patient is not able to see one half of the field, one half, so lateral half or the medial half or upper or superior. If the patient tells, it's an intelligent patient can tell all these things. So whether there are any field defects are there and any black spots in the field of vision. So that indicates patient is having involvement of the optic nerve. Or sometimes sudden loss of vision can also occur, blurring of vision, color vision defect. So these are the symptoms suggestive of the optic nerve. Optic atrophy, that means there will be painless, or sometimes retrobulbar they can have painful. So progressive loss of vision, that also gives a clue the patient has got involvement of the optic nerve. Next comes the third. So you have to examine third, fourth, sixth. So you have to add all these things and then you have to examine. Put together, you have to have the symptoms. And then. So when the oculomotor third nerve is affected, so usually the patient will have ptosis. That means the eye is, I will show all those things later. So if the patient says, my eye is closed, I am not able to lift the eyelid. So that is what is called ptosis. So that indicates that may be due to a third nerve palsy, oculomotor paralysis. Or the patient may be having a partial ptosis. So that indicates the patient may be having Horner syndrome. So usually complete ptosis indicates third nerve, and if it's a partial, that means it is a cervical sympathetic, that is a Horner syndrome, you have to think of it. Next, another important thing in case of oculomotor is a double vision. So whenever he opens his eye with the possibly And then if you see, it has got a double vision. So each appear as a double view. That is a double vision. So that indicates once again there is the involvement of the oculomotor nerve. And then squint. So squint means the eyeball is shifted to one side, medially or laterally. So medially, internal squint indicates a sixth nerve palsy, and external squint indicates the third nerve palsy. The eyeball will be on the lateral side. That means it is a third nerve palsy. If it is in the medial side, that means it is a oculomotor third nerve palsy. We have to know. And then the symptoms of third, fourth, sixth cranial nerves are, there will be in the third nerve, they will have ptosis, and then double vision they can have, and squint depending upon the sixth nerve or the third nerve. They can have either an internal squint or external squint. And then a diminished or absence of sweating over one half of the face, head and neck indicates a Horner syndrome, cervical sympathetic. So this you have to think of either in the brainstem lesion or in the neck region. Neck region, whenever there is a lymph node enlargement, if it presses over the this nerve, the patient, there are other causes are there for the Horner syndrome, malignancies and other things. So absence of sweating on one half of the head in our face. And these are the next cranial nerve, the trigeminal nerve. So trigeminal nerve has got both sensory as well as the motor part. So when the sensory nerve is affected, the patient will have usually numbness of the face on one half of the face they can have. And then tingling also can be there. And one other important feature of trigeminal involvement, they may have numbness, but at the same time they can have pain also, they can complain. Especially in case of trigeminal neuralgia, they can have pain when it is stimulated. So if you put a cold water, if you put over in, so they complain of severe pain. And also at the same time, they complain of the area of distribution, either a ophthalmic division, a maxillary or a mandibular division. They can have sensory symptoms like tingling and numbness they can have. Whereas motor symptom, their inability to chew the food, and jaw will be deviated to one side. So that is suggestive of a fifth cranial nerve. So fifth cranial symptoms are sensory and motor. In the motor, jaw deviation to the same side can be there, and also difficulty in chewing the food particles. So that is the important symptom you can get in case of a trigeminal nerve. Sensory, I told you already, they can have tingling and numbness on one half of the face, and also pain, trigeminal neuralgia on one half of the face can be there. And the next important cranial nerve, where everybody is a common cranial nerve which is affected in the CVA is the facial nerve. So everybody should know about the facial nerve, where it is originating, and then where it is distributed, and then the nerve root supply, everything you should know about the facial nerve. So I'll tell you in detail later about the facial nerve, which pores and other things. And is it upper motor or no lower motor? By history itself you can make out. So usually in case of upper motor neuron type, the patient complains of only deviation of the angle of mouth to one side, that is opposite side. If right side is affected, left side, left side deviation, right means left side. So that means there will be deviation of the angle of mouth and the drooling of saliva. So that indicates that is a upper motor neuron type of facial nerve palsy. So upper motor means usually the nucleus is situated in the brain. So where the nucleus is affected, you can have the lower motor neuron, and then above the nucleus, facial nucleus, if it is affected, that can produce the upper motor neuron type of facial palsy, as in the case of a CVA, where only the lower half of the face is involved. If entire half of the face is affected, that means it is a lower motor neuron type. That is from the nucleus to the periphery, where up to the parotid gland, the fibers, if they are affected. So usually the patient will have LMN type of facial palsy, where the entire half of the face, upper as well as the lower half, will be affected. So when the patient has got upper and lower, entire half of the face is affected, you have to think of a lower motor neuron type of facial palsy. If it is only the lower half of the face is involved on one side, that is due to UMN type of lesion, you have to think of it. So in the lower motor, so in the this one, so in the upper motor also, they may be inability to blow the cheeks. So the muscles involved are the muscles, the cheeks, that an inability to visual or inability to close the eye. That means a lag of thalamus. So lag of thalamus indicates that is a lower motor neuron type of lesion where the patient cannot close. So that is lag of thalamus. Usually you'll be confused with the lag of thalamus with the ptosis. Ptosis is inability to open the eye. And inability to close the eye, that means it is a lag of thalamus, indicative of a facial nerve involvement. And they may have epiphora, that is the angle is varying, and epiphora, that means they will have tears without any effort, that is epiphora can be there. And loss of taste sensation over the anterior two-thirds can be there. So we have to differentiate whenever a patient has got a facial nerve involvement, is it upper motor or lower motor? From the history itself, you can make out. Then coming to the eighth cranial nerve, vestibular and cochlear. So cochlear, acuity of hearing, is it decreased or not? And also you can ask the vestibular, vertigo can be there on the particular side, and they may have positional vertigo and vomiting. That can be there in case of vestibular involvement. And ringing sensation in the ear they can have. And then hyperacusis, that means it is a painful hearing. Hyperacusis is painful hearing. So these are all the symptoms which are suggestive of a eighth cranial nerve involvement. So usually in the case of brainstem involvement or tumors, so the patient can have meningiomas like that. So the patient can have involvement of the eighth cranial nerve. And this one, glossopharyngeal vagus, 10th and 11th cranial nerves, you have to examine. So I'm combined. You should not examine glossopharyngeal separately vagus because it has got both afferent and efferent. So that's why the patient has symptoms like difficulty in swallowing for liquids. So this is very important. So if a patient complains of a difficulty for swallowing for liquids alone, so that means we have to think of a neurological disease. On the other hand, if a patient complains both liquids and solids, so that means you have to think of the local pathology. Is it esophageal mucosal involvement or is there any tumor? If it is progressive, that means we have to exclude the presence of the malignancy. So usually in the neurological diseases, so patient will have the swallowing for the liquids, and then when they take forcibly, they'll have nasal regurgitation of the fluid. So these are the two important symptoms which are suggestive of a glossopharyngeal or vagal involvement. So that is a neurological involvement, brainstem involvement the patient can have. And the speech changes also, palate when it is affected, nasal quality of speech. So whenever a patient complains the quality of the speech, nasal speech is present and difficulty for swallowing liquids and the nasal regurgitation is there. So you have to think of a neurological deficit, you have to think of it. If it is progressive, that means in case of a progressive bulbar palsy is there. So in that patient can have a progressive lesion, progressive symptoms they can have. An acute like vascular lesions, so they will have sudden onset of these things they can have. And spinal accessory now usually they'll have what is called a torticollis or wry neck. So where the neck is deviated, holding the neck in the middle, and they'll have it will be shifted to one side or other. So that is torticollis or wry neck. So difficulty in holding the neck, wry neck, and difficulty in shrugging of shoulders. So elevation of shoulders if they give, or he has got a difficulty in the picking up bucket like that weight. If he is not able to pick up, so you have to think of a spinal accessory nerve when it is affected. So the patient can have this. And lost is the hypoglossal nerve, that is the 12th cranial nerve. So where it supplies all the groups of muscles in the tongue. So all the syllables which are spelled by the tongue, linguals especially, la, like that, they cannot spell it. So there will be difficulty in speech and also movements also. The patient cannot move the tongue anteriorly, posteriorly, above, below. So there will be difficulty in movements of the tongue, and also the deviation of the tongue can also be, you can make out one side, but we must be careful. So deviation of the tongue sometimes when the patient has got a seventh nerve paralysis, So because of the deviation of the angle of the mouth, apparently you may find the tongue is also deviated. But here you can see the movements are restricted and deviation of the tongue will be there. And if it is of a spastic and reduction of the size can occur, if it is a upper motor neuron type of the hypoglossal nerve. And another important symptom they can have difficulty in mixing of food in the mouth. So they are not able to mix the food in the mouth. So these are the symptoms which suggest there is the involvement of the hypoglossal nerve. Acute onset, you have to think of a vascular diseases. If it is a progressive, gradually progressive, that means you have to think of a progressive diseases. You have to neurological disease or a tumor. You have to think of it. Now these are all the things in the present history. And regarding the past history, we should ask about is there any recurrent attacks. So patient getting attack and he might have recovered or partially recovered and again he had a second attack on the same side or on the opposite side. You have to think of vascular etiology, you have to think of it. On the other hand, relapses and remissions. So first time he had a upper limb, then after 6 months or 3 months and develop the weakness of the other limb or a cranial nerve involvement. That means the patient will have, that is usually you have to think of multiple sclerosis. That is relapses and remission. That is a different one. Patient completely recovers and deficit, neurological deficit, some other neurological deficit occur again. So that is relapse and remission. Whereas here the recurrent attacks of the same side or opposite side. So that indicates a vascular event, you have to think of it. And past history of hypertension. So hypertension can produce any type of CVA. Either it could be it can be a thrombosis or a hemorrhage can occur or embolic manifestation can also occur. That may be usually in case of valvular diseases patient can have. And the diabetes. So hypertension and diabetes both will increase the enhances the atherosclerotic process. In turn, they may develop a cerebrovascular accident. And IHD, ischemic heart disease, once again, they may develop a ischemic heart disease later, they may develop either a embolic phenomena or because of usage of drugs, they may develop atherosclerotic or it can be a hemorrhage. So anything can occur with hypertension, diabetes and ischemic heart disease. The tuberculosis. So usually the tuberculosis, it involves the meninges, tuberculosis meningitis is common. But some people, they can develop even a tuberculoma where they come with a focal seizures they can have. Or in case of a tuberculous endarteritis, so that means it involves the vessels as in case of miliary tuberculosis or as a process of extension. So if the vessels are affected, that can tuberculous endarteritis. So that can produce a hemiplegia. So that is the importance of tuberculosis. And the rheumatic fever, of course. So rheumatic fever, latter followed by, so in case of rheumatic fever, acute rheumatic fever, some people, usually females, so they can develop chorea. Chorea they can have 6 months before or after the onset of rheumatic fever, cardiovascular disease. Or if the patient has got a valvular disease because of thromboembolic phenomena, they can develop the CVA, they can have exanthematous fever. So that is either a dengue fever or a chicken pox or measles. In those people, they can develop either meningitis or encephalitis, erythematous fever that can involve the central nervous system. Vaccination. So usually post-vaccinal myelopathy. So commonly it occurs with the ARV. So nowadays we are not giving the previous prophylactin like that. So usually nowadays the vaccination, post-vaccinal encephalopathy and myelopathy are less than compared to previous this one. And HIV. So HIV can involve any part of the CNS. So encephalitis can be there or a peripheral nerves or the spine, whatever it may be. Anything can be affected in case of HIV. And then syphilis once again. So syphilis in case of a secondary syphilis or a tertiary syphilis, a gamma can occur in the cerebral hemisphere. Or if the dorsal columns are involved, that is baby's dorsalis, where the posterior columns are affected mainly. So So that in that the previous history of syphilis, usually the history of syphilis, they may develop some chancre over the genitalia or any other area, and without treatment or taking one penicillin coke, they may have complete improvement, and they'll forget. The scar also may not be there. So history is very important to know whether the patient has got a extramarital contact, and then so syphilis can involve during the secondary or the tertiary stage. Syphilis can be affected. The CNS can be affected, or even spinal cord also affected. And drugs, already I told you, anticoagulants or antiplatelet drugs, or the this. So these are the common drugs, OC pills in a female. So we have to ask the history, which is the drugs, or even cocaine. So these are also can involve the central nervous system, and also it involves it can produce even hemorrhagic stroke like that. Epilepsy. So epilepsy can in a generalized way, so that can be a post-epileptic or post-epileptic phenomena. So they can develop the neurological deficit they can have. Or another important thing, it may indicate there may be, usually the patient may have early stage, they can have localized, later it can spread. Or another important symptom that indicate the patient in acute stage, if a patient comes with the seizures first time, so you have to think with along with the stroke, you have to think of a cerebral edema. You have to raise intracranial tension, can produce this one. And arthritis, that is arthritis indicates, so the patient may be having connective tissue disorder, and then later he may develop a neurological involvement. So these are all the things we have to ask. History of fever is also important. Suppose a febrile illness followed by neurological deficit, you have to think of either a viral infection or a bacterial infection. You have to think of it in the first. Next comes the family history, whether is occurring in family or not. A treatment history, I told you, is he taking any drugs for tuberculosis or hypertension, diabetes, ischemic heart disease, or a rheumatic fever. So you can know this, you can put the same etiology for this. So, and then next comes the personal history, usually alcoholism. So alcoholism can produce a dry beriberi, where they can have the neurological peripheral nerve involvement. They can have alcoholism, smoking, and then drug addictions. So drug addictions can also produce the involvement of the nervous system. They can have a degenerative manifestation. They can have. And in a female, menstrual history and obstetric history is also important. So this is all about the history. So history is very important, I told you. The mode of onset, progressive onset, and then past history is very important, whether the patient has a recovery or a recurrent attacks. So these are all the important things. So by which you can make out what exactly is the cause for the disease. You can make out. Even in COVID infection also, in the acute phase, they may not have, later they may develop a neurological deficit. They can develop. So that's why all these things are important while asking the history. Next comes the general examination. So general examination, as usual, you have to look for whether the patient has got any nutritional deficiency is there, followed by a neurological deficit, and then anemia. Anemia with a neurological deficit, you have to think of either it could be a B12 deficiency or a folic acid deficiency. You have to think of it. And jaundice. So jaundice. So usually, or icterus in case of kernicterus. So sometimes, so they can have this neurological deficit or copper metabolism. And Wilson's disease also, basal ganglia involvement can be there, along with jaundice can be there. Cyanosis once again indicates, in case of a valvular disease, say a patient having a TOF, tetralogy of Fallot, so they can develop a brain abscess. So cyanosis, later developing a neurological deficit. Like that, everything has got an importance. A clubbing usually not a feature of in a case of CVA, but in case of some poisonings or in case of some nutritional or some thing, they can have a clubbing. Some toxins can produce. And then chylomicronemia, that indicates iron deficiency anemia, later leading on to the peripheral neuritis. But usually the peripheral neuritis is not common with iron deficiency anemia. That is B12 deficiency, the most common thing, folic acid, which can lead to neurological deficit. A lymphadenopathy. So lymphadenopathy usually suggests infective etiology. Is it a tuberculosis, or the patient is having HIV or malignancies? So commonly hematological malignancies, say patient having Hodgkin's lymphoma or a lymphatic leukemia like that. In those people, the patient will have a malignancies. So patient can have lymphadenopathy, and along with that, the patient can have the neurological deficit. These are all the important things you should remember. And then pedal edema. So commonly the pedal edema occurs whenever the tone of the muscles are reduced, say in a paraplegia or in case of hemiplegia. So the patient is bedridden for a prolonged period. So in that vasomotor tone is lost. That's why the venous filling will be increased and patient can develop the pedal edema. So suppose if a patient is bedridden, so the patient can have edema over the sacrum and occipital region patient can have. So pedal edema or edema otherwise, you have to look for it in the general examination. And the neurocutaneous markers. So this is mainly to know the etiology. Suppose the patient is having multiple neurofibromatosis. I will show later what are all the things. So you have to examine in the general examination, FPLI spots. So there are so many things which you have to observe as neurological, neurocutaneous markers. And then vitals, of course, temperature, pulse, BP, respirations. Temperature, if the patient has got a temperature high, you have to think of infective etiology. Or a severe pontine hemorrhage, you have to think of hyperpyrexia. You have to think of a pontine hemorrhage. Whereas pulse, usually the pulse, so bradycardia, if it is there, associated patient is brought with the CVA and having a bradycardia, loss of consciousness, headache, vomitings are there, you have to think of a raised intracranial tension. On the other hand, if the patient has got tachycardia, so it can be either infective etiology or it can be due to a hemorrhage. Active bleed in the brain can produce a tachycardia. So either infective or the bleeding is the one of the cause for the tachycardia you have to make out. And BP, of course, usually hypertension, hypertensive crisis is the hypertension is a little bit higher when there is an 160, 140 like that, and diastolic is 80 to 90. That means it is a reactive hypertension where you should not correct the hypertension at that stage. So when the patient has got systolic more than 180, diastolic more than 100, so then you have to correct. Otherwise, if you correct the protective phenomena, reactive hypertension, if you treat vigorously, so the patient will have end organ damage will be there. So the neurological symptoms will be worsened. So that's why while treating the blood pressure, correcting the blood pressure, you have to take these precautions you have to take. Respiration involvement, usually when the vital centers are affected, usually brainstem lesions if it is there. So patient can have respiratory abnormalities can be there. So this is one picture showing, you can see the hemangioma. So you can see the discoloration, reddish discoloration is there, that is capillary hemangioma. So you can expect if the patient comes with the same person comes with the epileptic attack. So same hemorrhagic, so these can be there in the brain also, you have to think of it. Next, Sjagren patches. So where you can get tuberous sclerosis. So you can get the Sjagren patches you can make out. So this is a typical picture of a Sjagren patch. And then so this is also another thing, dimple you can make out in the spinal level. So it may indicate the patient may be having a disc prolapse or something like that. So you have to look for any thing you can make out. And these are the neurofibromatosis. So whenever you find a neurofibromatosis, so the same neurofibroma can be there in the brain or in the spinal cord. So they may present with a neurofibroma presenting a tumor, intracranial tumor, or a spinal cord pathology. They can have a tumor compressive neuropathies they can have. So that's why the neurocutaneous markers are important, neurofibroma. So this is called adenoma sebaceum. So this is one of the sign of a tuberous sclerosis where the child comes with an or even adolescent, they can come with a epileptic attack. So that is adenoma sebaceum. So adenoma sebaceum important. So on the general examination, if the patient is unconscious, So conscious means you can write conscious, or semi-conscious means that he is attending the verbal stimuli. If you talk, so he may respond. Or with vigorous this thing, if he develops and again goes into that is a drowsiness. And completely when he is not responding to internal or external stimuli. Internal means the bowel, so our bladder if it is distended, he is not responding. So that means the patient is in a coma state. So while assessing the state of neurological the consciousness, so there is the way best eye movement opening. So scoring system is there, Glasgow Coma Scale, where motor response and then verbal response. And basing on that, you can give the what is the score. On that you can tell how much the neurological deficit patient is having. Regarding this, you can manage. Level of consciousness, so usually coherent or orientation in time and place. So usually this is lost when there is a encephalitis or a diffuse brain damage, or when the patient is under influence of certain narcotic drugs. So this or encephalitis commonly. So whenever a patient comes with a fever with altered sensorium, so first thing we have to think of a encephalitis. Meningitis also sometimes they may have, but usually irritability can be there in case of meningitis. Photophobia, so they can have headache and other. Whereas if the patient is got orientation in time and place, last means you have to think of a diffuse brain involvement, you have to think of it. Next, memory. So memory, you have to ask for the recent events and then in the past events. So usually in case of dementias, the patient will have loss of recent memory. So what he has done in the previous moment, he will forget. But he remembers the olden days, what happened like that, he can narrate the stories. So is it the memory lost for recent events or the remote, you have to ask in the history. Then speech, so the speech disturbance, loss of speech is there, or difficulty in speech is there, or there are various types of speech, now echolalia, where they will repeat, parrot-like repetition can be there, or other cerebellar involvement. So there are so many diseases where a speech can be affected. Hallucinations means in the they will have altered sense of smell, and they will feel as if there is some abnormal sense of smell in the absence of the substance. Hallucinations, delusions means they may have the without existence of the object, they will feel as if something has come and they hit like that. Illusions means if they see a rope, so they will tell as if it is a snake like that. So interpretation is wrong, that is illusion. So when the patient has got these things, you have to think of whether the patient has got, is he a drug addict or is he having any abnormality, the psychiatric disorder, is he having mental disorder. Handedness, right-handedness and left-handedness. Left-handed, usually the patient is left-handed, so the right-handed means the speech center is on the left side. But whereas in the patient is left-handed, the speech center can be, he can be either, it can be there in the right or left, we can't say. But in the right-handed individual, mainly it is on the left hemisphere. Now the attitude of the patient. So there are typical attitudes are there. So that is the decerebrated rigidity, a decorticated rigidity, or a hemiplegic attitude. So this can give the decorticated rigidity means a hemiplegia on both sides. The appearance is like the hemiplegia on both sides. That is the upper limb will be flexion and flexion on all joints, and lower limb will be extended. So that is the decorticated rigidity. And the decerebrated rigidity, that indicates cortex is that the brain listening is lost cortex, and patient will have all extended posture they can have. This is a more serious condition when compared to the decorticated rigidity, decerebrated and decorticated. Now, physical assessment of the, so when you have to examine the patient, so first you have to test the, so after this you have finished the general examination. Now we'll go for the examination of the neurological system. Under these headings you have to test it. Testing of cranial nerves while you are writing. So one side you have to write the cranial nerve 1, 2, 3, 4 like this up to 12. And then what are all the your examination you have done on one side, and then you have to write left and right, you have to mention it. And wherever you are finding a change, you have to mention in that. So like that, you have to write the cranial nerve examination. You have to. So in this order only you have to write, not first motor system, then cranial nerves, not like that. According to the neurological this thing, you have to standard. First you have to examine the cranial nerves, then the motor functions, then the reflexes also comes under the motor system, then the sensory function. Like that you have to write in the order. So I will finish off 2 or 3 cranial nerves, and then later in the next class I will finish. Olfactory, sense of smell. So for that, patient should not know which substance you have brought. So you ask the patient to close both eyes, and then you close one nostril, and then you test it. So usually the familiar substance should be used. So coffee powder or tea powder, something like that, which you can recognize. And each nostril should be tested separately. And irritants should not be used, like ammonia. So whatever, if you use a irritant, so the sensations can be carried through the 5th cranial nerve. So that's why only you have to use a familiar substances, coffee powder, you can use it, and then hing powder. So that can, and each nostril should be separately tested, and you can note down. And olfactory nerve test with coffee powder, unilateral anosmia is most significant. So if the patient has got unilateral anosmia, we have to think of a neurological disease on that particular side. Bilateral, if it is a temporary 1 week or like that, 2 days, that means it is a viral infection, you have to think of. So if it is progressive, you have to think of meningioma, olfactory meningioma, or fracture. So usually fracture of the frontal, that means anterior cranial fracture. So usually they can have the involvement of the olfactory nerve. Next is the optic nerve involvement. So optic nerve you have to write, second cranial nerve you have to write, visual acuity you have to examine. For the distant and near vision, color vision you have to mention it. And then fundus examination. Fundus examination is not for the undergraduates. So only you have to tell, you have to see the visual acuity, the distant. So that is ask the patient to at a 6 meters distance, finger counting you can do, but because at the bedside you may not have these charts. So that's why you ask him to close one eye and then let him count. So like that, from 6 meters, 5 meters, gradually you get him up to 1 meter distance. Suppose if the patient is not able to see at the 1 meter distance, then you have to just wave off your finger like that. Is he able to appreciate it or not? Still, if he is not able to appreciate, then you throw the light. So you take the one torch light and then throw the light. If he is unable to recognize the light, that means that eye is completely blind. So visual acuity, approximately the distance at which a patient is able to count, finger count, that is the most important thing. Next is for the near vision. So you can give a card at the distance of 1 meter you can give. And then whether is it is illiterate, so you can draw some zero like that, some figure. And then whether he is able to identify that or not. Or if he is illiterate, then you can ask the patient to read that one. So that is for the near vision. Distant vision, near vision, and color vision. Color vision, we don't have Ishihara charts. Only you can get some color threads and then ask him to name what is the color of it. So usually, and then appendix. So in some people, they wrote, so the examination of the pupils and then other things, they will not come under the optic nerve. So second cranial nerve, usually you have to see the visual acuity and then color for the distant and near vision, color vision, and then fundus, you have to test it. So that is the second nerve port you can make out. So how where it starts and then how it processes at the optic chiasma and then finally how it enters into the brain. So visual acuity already I told you, Snellen chart in your ophthalmology, but at the patient you have to use 6 meters distance finger counting. So test one eye at a time. Don't test it with both eyes open. So near vision already I told you, and then for the each eye should be separately tested and then print whether he is able to read or not. He can, or a fingerprint, and then perception of light and field of vision. So this is also important. You have to do the field of vision in under the second cranial nerve. So that is a confrontation test. Confrontation means you have to think, you assume your field of vision is normal and you compare the patient. So like that. So what is the principle behind it is, so you must sit at the same level, 1 meter distance, and then you close the right eye, he has to close the opposite eye, and then he has to fix the gaze. So he has to look straight into your eye. So you should not move this side or that side. Then so you can keep your hand over the head and then fix his head, and then so you keep in the middle between the patient and yourself, and then you keep laterally, and then you slightly get it to the field of vision. If you are able to see without moving the eyeball, so if you are able to see, the patient should also see the object, finger. So like that, you have to test the lateral and then inferior and then superior and medial. Like that, you can test the field of vision. So that indicates patient is having any hemianopia, quadrantenopia. You can make out with this field of vision. That is confrontation test. And then common field of vision, homonymous hemianopia. That means a lesion posterior to optic chiasma. So this homonymous one side, so they can have it homonymous hemianopia. They can present bitemporal or important in the optic chiasma. Pituitary tumor is there, so they can not able to see the both the temporal peaks like that. So like that, which type of hemianopia is the patient? Quadrantenopia clinically it's difficult to make out. So these are all the means by which you can make out the any visual defects are there or not. You can make out. So I think I can stop. Next class, I'll tell you about the third, fourth, and sixth cranial nerves. Thank you very much. And if you have got any doubt, you can ask me afterwards. Thank you. Please say, Manaya.